ഞാൻ എല്ലാവർക്കും കർത്താവിന്റെ നാമത്തിൽ വന്ദനം ഒരിക്കൽ കൂടി പറയുന്നു. Though we live in this country, basically we are Indians. Therefore, it is very important to have an idea about the history of the church in our country. We may not be able to go to all the details again because the time framework is very limited. But we'll try our best to have a look into the origin and the major developments in the history of the church in our country generally and particularly our state Kerala. Now, it is commonly believed that Saint Thomas, one among the 12 disciples, he was the one who brought Christianity into India, and I said particularly to the southern part of India, usually in those days known as Malabar, the modern Kerala. But we have no contemporary evidence or historical records to prove that Thomas came to Malabar and he was the founder of the church in India. There are hundreds of arguments, some supporting this view that Thomas came. Then also on the contrary, there are several views that they deny the arrival of Thomas, the apostolate of Thomas in Malabar. Some support it. Some say that Christianity entered India during a later period. Probably the people who came from Persia from the 4th century onwards. Some even go still further and say from the beginning of the 16th century, with the arrival of colonial powers, Christianity came to India. But we do not have proper documentary evidences to prove the existence of Christianity right from the 1st century itself. But there is a common belief and there is a tradition that Christianity in India is as old as Christianity itself. Since there are numerous opinions regarding the origin of the church, several classifications also began to come one after the other. One of the Catholic father who made much studies and researches in this area, Father Hambe, he classified all these opinions into 4 categories. The first opinion is that a group of people totally deny the arrival of Thomas to India or to Malabar. Then second group of people, they say Thomas did not visit South India, but he visited only North India. North India was the place of his ministry. Then a third group of people, they say he visited both North India as well as South India. And the last group of people gave more emphasis on the South Indian apostolic ministry of Thomas. So that itself shows that there are numerous opinions regarding the origin of the church in India and in Malabar. Now, from our reading and understanding, the history of the church, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ Christianity, remained within Kerala during the first 1500 years. Only from the beginning of the 16th century, Christianity began to move out of Kerala to other parts of India. That means during the first 1500 years of the history of the church in India, all the Christians and Christianity was there only within the boundary of Kerala, usually known by the name Malabar in those days. Now, since we have no evidence to prove the origin of the church in the 1st century and the arrival of Thomas, we have to look at the various possibilities during the 1st century and find out whether it was possible for a person like Thomas to travel from Jerusalem, Palestine, and come to Malabar to preach the gospel and begin Christianity there. Now we have numerous writings, both from within India and also from outside India. Now the first 500 years in the Christian era, that means AD 1 to AD 500, that 500 years is known by the name Sangam period. Sangha kalam ennu Malayalathil parayunnu. Sangam period. SANGAM, Sangam period. During those days, Kerala also was part of Tamilagam, and Tamil was the dominant language. Malayalam began to develop in a later stage. Now in Tamil, there were numerous writings during this Sangam period, and those writings are usually known as the Sangam literature. Sangha Kala Krithigal എന്നാണ് അറിയപ്പെടുന്നത്. അകനാനൂരു, പുറനാനൂരു, പതിറ്റുപാട്ട്, so many writings were available. Then at the same time, people from outside India, they also began to write about India, about Malabar during those days, particularly the famous Roman historian Pliny, Sozomen, Aristides. So they all began to write much about South India, mainly because there was a very strong commercial contact or trade relationship between South India and the Western countries. Almost all the prominent nations in the West during those days were in connection with Malabar, mainly because of the availability of spices that was only available in Malabar during those days. The most famous pepper, usually known as the black gold, ginger, cardamom, nutmeg, and everything. So these spices were available only in India during those days, and all the Western countries were coming to India, to Malabar, to purchase spices from here and take it back to their own countries. Babylon, Greece, Roman Empire, Phoenicians, Jewish community, the Persians, the Egyptians, all these nations were actively involved in trade with Malabar. From time immemorial, we have evidence that there was a strong trade connection between Western countries and Malabar. Even during the time of King Solomon, Solomon lived probably around 1000 years before the coming of Thomas to India. So even during the time of King Solomon, there was a connection between Palestine and India. We have some references in 1 Kings chapter 9, verse 28, where we read, from Ophir, nearly 16 tons of gold was brought to Jerusalem for the building of the temple and for the building of his palace. Now that Ophir is identified as Pooar near Thiruvananthapuram. We have historical evidences for that. So probably this gold was taken from Kerala, Pooar, that is Ophir, Pooar to Jerusalem. Then again in the following chapter 10 we find the visit of Queen Sheba. She also came from the east, and she also presented gold, spices and frankincense. That again shows that during the time of King Solomon, there was a connectivity between his nation and the East. Then even during the birth of Jesus Christ, the three wise men, the Magi, who saw the star, traveled a long distance, went to Bethlehem, saw the child, worshipped and presented gold, myrrh and frankincense. Now, there is a historical proof that they might have probably gone from India to see the baby when Jesus was born. That means there was a close connection between Western India and South India during those days. Not only South India, even North India also, because many migrations began to take place even before the arrival of Thomas to India. One very good example is that Alexander the Great, who lived in the 4th century BC, he came up to the Khyber Pass in North India with a plan to conquer India. Meantime, he fell sick, died, and he was taken back. That means India was known to the Western countries, and there was a strong commercial contact between India and the Western countries. Fleets, number of ships were traveling between west and east. So in that context, it was possible for Thomas also to get into one of those ships, travel and come to India. So there was no impossibility, there was no question of impossibility. It was not possible for Thomas to come, but it was possible. We have internal evidences and external evidence, but that doesn't say that Thomas came or not, but there was a continuous contact between Malabar and West. It was possible for anyone to travel between West and East. AD 45-ലാണ് an Egyptian navigator by Hippalus. He was the one who found out how best the monsoon winds can be used for an easy, fast traveling between West and East. So with the help of the monsoon winds from AD 45 onwards, there was a frequent traveling. So it was by all possibility, it was possible for Thomas or anyone to come to India even during the first century with the gospel of Jesus Christ to preach here in South India and begin Christianity. So that was one of the possibility. Then second possibility, there was a large number of Jewish community living in different parts of Kerala in Malabar. Even now also we know in Kochi we have a synagogue. Then a street is known after the name Jew Street. Then apart from that, even before the development of Kochi, Irinjalakuda, Paravur area in Thrissur district, that was a stronghold of Judaism. Large number of hundreds of Jews were living in Paravur, Irinjalakuda, that particular area. In Irinjalakuda town, there is a small hilly area which is still known as Judakunna, the hill where the Jews were living. Then there is also a huge cemetery where the bodies of the Jews were buried there. That is still preserved by the government of Kerala, the Department of Archaeology. So large number of Jews were living in India, in Malabar, different parts of Malabar. That may be another point of attraction for Thomas to come to India, because Jesus has given a commandment. Go ye into the sheep that are lost. കാണാതെ പോയ ആടുകളുടെ അടുക്കൽ പോയി, you have to tell them that the Messiah has come. Probably Thomas might have thought of coming to Malabar and tell the Jews living in Malabar that their Messiah has already come. So this also can be considered as another possibility of the arrival of Thomas to India. Now we have numerous traditions handed over from generation to generation, both orally transmitted traditions and also in the form of written traditions. Numerous traditions are available. Now we have several songs which are very common in Kerala, known by the name Margankali, Ramban Paattu, Veeradiyan Paattu. Then the ancient art forms like Chavuttu Nadagam, the stamping with the feet. So the content of all these songs are the heroic activities of the arrival of Thomas, his life in Malabar, how he established the churches, the miracles that he was able to do. So these are the contents of all these songs sung by the Christians right from first century till today. So these songs were handed over from one generation. Father taught the children, then they taught their children, so it continued. Still, these songs are very common. This ancient form of art and songs are very common among the Christians in Kerala. Then apart from that, there are several other concrete traditions regarding the origin of the church in India. Now, there are three major traditions regarding that. Number one, we call it as the Malabar tradition, the tradition current among the people living in Malabar. Second is the Western tradition. That is, what do the people living outside India began to say about Thomas and the origin of the church in India. Then we have a third tradition that is regarding the last days of the life of Thomas, how he was martyred, where he was wounded, where he was buried. So that is the Mylapore tradition. Mylapore is a place in Tamil Nadu, the city of Chennai, part of the city of Chennai. I'll briefly explain those three traditions. Now, the Malabar tradition is very common among the people living in Malabar. In all the Episcopal mainline churches, if you just ask a small child, he will be able to immediately say without any hesitation that this is the thing. That Thomas the Apostle, Thomas Liga, he came to Malabar. He laid the foundation for the church in India. And we are the followers of Saint Thomas. See, this is a living, ongoing, traditional belief among the people who live in Kerala or Malayalis scattered all over the world. Now, according to this tradition, I'll just say the gist of the tradition. Thomas the Apostle, after visiting some places in Persia, Parthia, or the Arabia Felix, he traveled in a ship, boat, and came to Malabar in AD 52 and landed in a place by name Krankannur, that is Kodungallur, in Thrissur district. Then he began to preach the gospel to the Jews living in the neighboring locality, and he wanted to convert them and make them to believe that Christ is their Messiah and to believe and accept him as their Messiah. Then after sharing the gospel with them, he began to move out and he began to preach the gospel to the people living in the locality. And as a result of his preaching and teaching, he was able to establish 7 churches. Tradition says 7.5 churches. 7 churches. And the places where we believe, or the tradition say that he started churches are this. Number 1, Krankannur, the harbor where he landed, usually known as Maliyankara. അതിൽ നിന്നാണ് മലങ്കര എന്നുള്ള പേരൊക്കെ വരുന്നത്. So Maliyankara, the nearby place Parur. Then there is another nearby place Palayur. Then Gokamangalam, Niranam, Chayil, and Kollam. So these are the 7 places where the traditions say that Thomas established the churches. Then the half churches, the common opinion is that he was not able to build a church, but he was able to erect a cross, Thiruvidankoodu, near the border of Kerala and Tamil Nadu now. So this is the traditional belief regarding the founding of the church by Thomas in Kerala. He established 7.5 churches. Then he ordained some priests or pastors for the leadership of the church, mainly from 4 families, dominant families. The traditions say that Brahmins converted to Christian faith during the time of Thomas. Their family names are Shangarapuri, Pagalumattam, Kali, and Kaliyankal. So these 4 family names also are mentioned in this tradition. So he ordained people from these families to lead the church, and then he moved on, went on to crossed over to Tamil Nadu, to the city of Chennai, and there also he began to do the same, preaching of the gospel, sharing the gospel with the people. Majority of the people during those days in Chennai, particularly Mylapore area, belonged to the Brahmin community. Many accepted Christianity and they became Christians. But majority of the Brahmins, they did not believe in Christianity and they began to somehow kill Thomas and bring an end to Christianity there. So they were waiting for a chance to kill Thomas. Now if anyone familiar with the city of Chennai, now 3-4 places are identified in connection with the origin of the church in Chennai and the martyrdom of Thomas. In Seidapet, exactly opposite to the main church there, Pastor D. Mohan's assembly, there is a place by name Little Mount, Chinnamalai in Tamil. We come to know that. See, there is a cave carved in a rock. Now, the traditions say that Thomas used to go to this cave for his daily prayer. The Brahmins, knowing that he is coming to this cave for prayer every day, they decided to kill him when he come there. So, a group of Brahmins came. They could not enter inside the cave because the entrance was very small. They brought a long spear and speared him. So he was wounded. Somehow he was able to escape from that cave. He began to run, and he ran towards the south few kilometers. And as he was climbing another hill, he fell, collapsed, and he died. At that place is identified as St. Thomas Mount near the Chennai airport today, where we have a chapel and several steps leading to that place. Then the body was buried near the coastal area in Mylapore, where one of the main church in Chennai, St. Santhum Cathedral, now under the Catholic Church, that was built, and inside that church, if you visit, you can see the tomb of Saint Thomas. But we do not know exactly whether it was the tomb of Thomas or somebody else, but that is believed as, considered as the tomb of Saint Thomas. So he came to Tamil Nadu, where he was preaching, and several various stories are regarding his martyrdom. Anyway, all the stories unanimously agree that Thomas became a martyr, and the body was buried in Chennai. That was in AD 72. So in 52 he landed in Malabar and became a martyr in AD 72. So this is the Malabar tradition regarding the origin of the church in India. Then Western tradition also are there. Now, one of the Western tradition, mainly on the basis of an apocryphal book, Acts of St. Thomas, that say that Thomas came to Punjab during the middle of the 1st century. An Indo-Parthian king by name Gundafernes, he was the ruler of Punjab. Now he was looking for a carpenter to build a palace for him. So Thomas was introduced as a carpenter. It's all stories. And the king gave the plan and the money necessary for building the palace. But instead of Thomas building the palace, he went around preaching the gospel and distributed money to the poor people. When the time came for the king to come and see the palace, there was no palace. The king became very angry, so he arrested Thomas and he was imprisoned. During the time his brother died, then the story says that after death, this younger brother was taken to heaven, where he was able to see huge mansions, and he wanted the angels to allot one of that mansion for him to live in the heaven. But the angel said that particular mansion cannot be given to this boy, but that was built by a Christian for a king by name Gundafernes in Punjab. So the boy realized all that story. He took the permission from the angels and came down from heaven to Punjab, told his brother that you need not worry. Though Thomas did not build a palace here in Punjab, he has already built a palace for you in heaven. So the king was highly pleased. He went to the prison, released Thomas, and the king and the whole family accepted faith and they became Christians. Now this is a story. But this was totally rejected as a story till 1834. The Archaeological Survey of India made some excavations in Punjab, and from Punjab they found out several coins with the inscription of this king Gundafernes and his brother Gad and all the details. Carpenters proved that coins were of the middle of the 1st century. But again, that do not prove that Thomas came and the origin of the church in Punjab. Okay, similarly, there are numerous traditions regarding the origin of the church in India. Then, looking at the outside India, from 300 onwards, almost all the writers, apostolic fathers and Christian writers, they all agreed that India was the mission field of Thomas. Thomas went to India. But there are other traditions also. One tradition says that Thomas did not come, but Bartholomew came to India. He came to Kalyana in Mumbai. So he was the one who brought Christianity. But 99% of the opinions, writings and evidences and traditions point towards the fact that it was Thomas who came to India by the middle of the 1st century, and he became the founder of the church in India. Many other details are there, but we have no time to look into that. The first historical evidence regarding the existence of Christianity, not about the arrival of the Christian Thomas, but there were Christians in India, in Malabar, in South India. The first written historical evidence that comes from the beginning of the 6th century. Around 528. In those days, there were several people who wanted to travel all over the world and explore the world. In that course of time, activity, one traveler by name Cosmas Indico Platus, that is a full name. Now he visited South India, Sri Lanka, Ceylon and all these countries. Then after going back to his place, he wrote a travelogue, a diary, travel diary, which is the very famous Universal Christian Topography, a book written by Cosmas. Now in this book, we have clear written documentary evidence that there were Christians in Malabar when he visited. He says, I visited Malabar where pepper grows. I saw the Christians. I saw priests and bishops came from Persia. So these are the informations that Cosmas, when he came to Malabar, he saw and later he wrote it. So we can say this can be considered as the first reliable historical information that there were Christians in Malabar by the beginning of the 6th century. Then later also, numerous travelers from different parts of Europe, from China also, Fahian, Huianxing, but some Catholic monks during their travel, worldwide travel, Marco Polo, Niccolo di Conti, John Marignoli, so many, they all began to visit India. Now Marco Polo wrote, when he visited Mylapore, he saw a tomb guarded by a Muslim, but this Muslim said that that was the tomb of St. Thomas. So we have numerous such evidences and informations that Christianity was existing in Malabar right from the early centuries. Then other possibilities. Now apart from traditions, we have some historical evidences also, particularly archaeological evidences. Now from different parts of India, stone crosses were excavated, unearthed, kurichedutittundu, numerous stone crosses. Stone crosses shows that these were made even before metals were in common usage. Those crosses are still preserved in Orthodox Seminary in Kottayam Valiyapalli, then Marthoma headquarters in Tiruvalla. These crosses are still preserved, crosses of very ancient origin. So that also shows that Christianity was in existence in Kerala during the early centuries. But there are several other archaeological evidences. One example, see the second place where Thomas established the church, Palayur. Kannur, Maliangara, then Palayur. Now there is a story related to the beginning of the church in Palayur. Now, 30 years back, the church in Palayur, they wanted to demolish that old church building and they wanted to build a new church in Palayur. While they began the digging work, while they were digging that premises, they saw large number of Hindu idols and also remnants of a Hindu temple from the church compound. When this was excavated, the Hindu community in Kerala, they began to make a huge protest. So there was much propaganda in Kerala that Christians came to Malabar, they demolished our temples, they converted it as churches, so we will never allow. We want to demolish these churches and build temples in that place. Even the government has to interfere. You may also remember the Nilekal issue. So that became a great crisis in Kerala. Much propaganda was there. The government machinery also began to involve, and that laid the foundation for the Hindu fundamentalism in Kerala also. Now, finding of Hindu temples, remnants of Hindu temples and idols in a church premises. When this was found, the people began to recollect the story regarding the origin of the church in Palayur. Palayur was a Brahmin village, and there was a temple. We know that every temple will be attached to a water source, either on the river bank or on the near to a pond. So in Palayur also there was a Brahmin a temple. Brahmins were the majority of the people, and there was a pond also. Now every morning the Brahmin priests come to this pond to have their morning bath and ablutions. Then they go to the temple and offer their pujas. Now Thomas also was traveling through this place, and while he was moving through this place, he saw every day the Brahmin priests coming to this place. They go into the water, the pond, then they take the water in their hands and they throw it to the sky. So after noticing this, Thomas one day he stopped at the side of the pond, and he began to enter into a conversation with this Brahmin priest. So he began to ask, hey, what are you doing? Then they said, okay, we are offering to our God. This water is offering. Then Thomas began to mock at them, saying that, see, the water you are throwing up is not staying there. That means your God is not accepting it. That's the reason why the water is coming down. Then there was a confrontation between Thomas and the Brahmin priest. Then there was a tug of war between them. Then finally, the large number of people in that village came around and they began to stand around. So they wanted to prove which God is the true God, whether the God of the Brahmins, the Hindus, or God of Thomas. The proof was both parties, one after the other, should go to the water, take the water in their hands, and they should throw the water up. The water that thrown by whom do not come down, that is the proof of that God is the true living God. Both parties agreed, and first chance was given to the Brahmins. They took the water, they threw it up, but as all of them were watching, the water came down. Then Thomas went into the pond. He also with prayer took the water and he threw it up. The story says the water thrown by Thomas did not come down. That was suspended in the air itself. As per the agreement, this became the proof that God whom Thomas served or Christians serve is the true God. And the agreement was that whoever proved that their God is the true God, the other party should accept and believe and accept that God. So no other alternative for these Brahmins. So they were forced to accept the agreement, and they accepted Christian faith, and they were baptized in that same pond itself. So that was the story regarding the origin of the church in Palayur. So when this few of the Brahmins were baptized and became Christian, the rest of the Brahmins did not want to stay in that village because they considered it as a polluted village. So they wanted to move away from that village. Then there was no one to come to that temple. So eventually that temple was converted as a church, and they began to assemble there for the worship service. 2-3 things to make it more interesting to you. Now, related to this story, there are few words, phrases coined in the Malayalam language. Now, the Brahmins who did not believe this story or did not believe in Jesus Christ, they decided to go to the nearby village. And Vembanad was the name of the nearby village. So while leaving this village, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ deserting this village, they said, Iniyate Kuli Vembanad. That means they cannot go to the pond and have their morning bath and ablutions so that they can offer their puja. So since that was not possible because the pond and the village was polluted, they said, even if we take bath, that will be in Vembanad. So this became a Malayalam usage in the later days. Iniyate Kuli Vembanad. That means we have nothing to do with this place. Then while leaving that place, The Brahmins called that village Palayur as a cursed land. Shavikyappetta sthalam. Shabakad. And that Shabakad is the prominent place in Thrissur district known by the name Chavakad. Shabakad, Chavakad. Similarly, when we go to Kunnangulam, Padanyi area, there are Brahmins and Christians having the same family name. One family, Kuduma Pere, same family name. But some houses belong to the Brahmin community and some to the Christian. For example, Cheruvattur, a prominent family in Kunnangulam area. With the same family name, till today we can find the Brahmins and also Christians. So connecting all these informations, we cannot outrightly deny it as merely a cooked up, fabricated story. There may be some elements of reality behind the beginning of the church in Palayur. That may be the reason why eventually the temple would have been gone under the mud, and while digging this Palayur church compound during the 20th century, they found number of idols and remnants of the Hindu temples. Why I said is that there are so many informations like that. Okay, moving on. In the Christian calendar, one day is celebrated as Saint Thomas Day, that is July 3rd. So every year, even in 2020, 19, July 3rd was celebrated as the Saint Thomas Day. So one day in a year is set apart to remember the arrival of Thomas, his ministry here, his death and burial here. So one day still is remembered for the coming of Thomas. So that also can be. See, naturally, even our own dear ones who died some 10 or 15 years back, we may not exactly remember the date or the day, but Thomas is not our relative. He came some 2000 years back to Malabar, but we still, as a community of Christians in Malabar, they still wanted to remember that great man, his ministry and his martyrdom in India. Okay, now with this, I'm just stopping that particular area. So, though we have no historical evidence, majority of the evidences point towards the arrival of Thomas and the beginning of the church by the middle of the 1st century. Even after 2000 years, this memory handed down from generation to generation still remain as a living memory. Usually we say in Malayalam, Urakkathil vilichu chodichalum. See, at any time, if anyone asks, the Christians in Malabar are ready to say that it was Thomas Leha who came to Malabar by the middle of the 1st century, and he was the one who baptized our forefathers, and we belong to him and we follow his tradition. But there are negative opinions also. I said not Thomas but Bartholomew came. Other groups say Christianity did not begin in the 1st century but during a later period. But considering all these informations, traditions, evidences from within the church and outside, Sangam literature, Western writings, almost all the informations point towards the possibility of the arrival of Thomas to Malabar and he being the founder of the church in India. I'm just moving to the next level. Now Thomas, he left Malabar and went to Mylapore in Tamil Nadu. And he appointed some priests, some leaders to take care of the church. But after their period, we have no records or no evidence what happened to the church in Malabar or the community of Christians. The several churches started by Thomas, what happened to them from the end of the 1st century till a later period? Except few passing references from here and there, which we have to connect, bridge all these informations, and we should make an effort to try to understand what happened to the Christian community in Malabar after the death of Thomas. Now, by the end of the first century, what we can assume is that the church in Malabar, the small community, became a group of people or a sheep flock without a shepherd. Now we know a flock cannot survive with the support of a shepherd. The church also is compared to a flock, and Christ is our shepherd, or the appointed servants of God. So spiritual leadership is very essential for a meaningful existence of any Christian congregation, any community. But by the end of the first century, the church began to lose a competent leadership for the church. Surrounded by the Hindus, surrounded by the local culture, no Bible to read, no one to advise, no one to teach, no one to preach. All the little things that they heard and learned from Thomas, that was the only faith and the practice that the church had during those days. Since people from Persia were coming to Malabar for trade, there was a close contact between Malabar and Persia. The tradition also says that Thomas, before coming to Malabar, he was doing the work in Persia, Parthia. So Thomas stands as a link between Malabar and Persia, or Christians in Malabar and Christians in Persia. Therefore, occasionally some priests or some bishops began to come from Persia to Malabar, and they began to give spiritual leadership to the Christians. But that was not continuous. Once in a while, some of the people come and they give some leadership. But there were limitations. Though people who came from Persia, they never knew Malayalam. In the churches, if they conduct a worship service, since they do not know Malayalam, they cannot conduct it. The language of them was Syriac. So by using Syriac language, they began to conduct the worship services in the churches in Malabar, and the people were not aware of Syriac also. Only when the priest or the bishop turned back and showed the sign of the cross, the members who attend the church, they make the sign of the cross. Apart from this, there was nothing. The church Christians were not able to understand anything. The priests, they recite the Syriac liturgy, but the people were not able to understand. So though there was some services, the people were not able to enjoy, and they were not able to make any benefit or any blessing of that. That was the reason why the Christians during the early days, they were not interested in going to the church also. Usually you had the people in Kerala say only 3 times a Christian, a Malabar Christian usually goes to the church. One carried by the parents for baptism, then for marriage, then again carried by the people for the burial. Only during festivities they used to go to the church, because there was no blessing, there was no meaning in going to the church also. So this was a situation, spiritual situation of the church in Malabar after the death of Thomas. Definitely we can say a lethargic situation. There is life, but no activity. In Nanchi Tinna, Meena Noko Pandu Parayumarunnu. It won't die, but it cannot move. So this was a spiritual background of the church in Malabar. Occasionally, from time to time, some of the priests came. But though they conducted the service, the Christians were not able to understand anything. That means, by name, they were Christians during the early centuries. But they had no Bible to read. That they got only in the 19th century. There was no proper spiritual leadership. We can imagine what would have been the state of affairs of the spiritual life of the Christian community in Malabar. So this situation continued for several years, not several years, for 500 years, 1500 years, till the arrival of the Portuguese in the beginning of the 16th century. So first 1500 years, the church in Malabar, the Christians in Malabar, our forefathers, they remained there as Christians, but not knowing what Christianity is all about. They were known as Christians by their name, but lifestyle was exactly the same of the people living nearby, the same dress code. The non-Christians and the Christians had the same dress code. They ate the same food. The architectural style of their houses also were the same. There was only one sign to identify a Christian house from a non-Christian house. That was, there was a sign of the cross on the front door of the Christian house. That was the only sign that a Christian was able to be identified, apart from the name. Christians also used to wear the earring. The dress code was of the same thing with the other non-Christians. So for 1500 years, this remained as the same situation for the Christian community in Malabar. But some incidents took place in between. In the 4th century AD, I said already, there were large number of Christians in Persia during those days. In the 4th century, there was a severe persecution in Persia. Many began to leave and flee from Persia to escape and save their life. Since the Christians in Persia were aware of the Christians in Malabar, some of the Christians thought that if they come to Malabar, they will be welcomed by the Christians. So a group of Christians, several occasions, they decided to leave Persia and come to Malabar. In AD 345, a prominent person known by the name Thomas of Cana, Thomas the Canaanite, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ മലയാളത്തിൽ പറയുന്നു Knaithomen. So he, along with a group of people, families, 70 families, one version say, 400 families, another version say, they came. Just they wanted to save their life from persecution. So they came in a boat to Malabar and landed in Kranganur. The king of Kranganur was Chairman Perumal during that time. Now he was very happy to receive a group of people who came from Persia. Shimei and Malayalamil പറയുന്നത് ഷീമയിൽ നിന്ന് വന്ന ആളുകൾ. So with the notion that they have come with much money, gold and everything, the king went, welcomed them, gave them land free of cost and free of tax. Then he built a city for them on the banks of the river Periyar, which was known by the name the city of the great king, Mahadevara Pattanam, where these Persian Christians came and they began to settle. Then they began to mingle with the Christians in Malabar, or St. Thomas Christians we can call them. Now St. Thomas Christians who were already here in Malabar and Christians who came from Persia during the time of Thomas of Cana. But there was no distinction between them. They began to join together. There was also marriage relationship. But now a group of Christians in Kerala claim that they are the direct descendants of Thomas of Cana and they are not willing to associate with the other Christians in Malabar or in India. They call themselves as the Canaanite Christians. They are divided in different denominations. One group is in the Catholic Church. One group is in the Jacobite Church. I'm sorry to say, one group is in the Pentecostal community also. They do not want to mingle with the other Christians. They do not want to involve in marriage relationship with the others. They claim that they are of pure stock. They are the original Christians. But there is no historical proof and it is absolutely a true fabricated story and tradition. To make it very fun, interesting. Now Thomas of Cana, they say that he was the most holiest of a holy person. And we are the descendants of him. And the other Christians, they began to say that they are the children born to Thomas of Cana in a concubine. അലക്കുകാരത്തി എന്നാണ് പറയുന്നത്. That was belonged to the lower caste. So one group came. Then again, periodically, several groups came from Persia to Malabar. But one advantage was the minority Christian community in Malabar, there was a numerical growth. And the privileges given by the king, annana social status privileges were given to the Christians by Chairman Perumal, particularly to ride on elephants, to be carried on palanquins. So the high social privileges enjoyed by the Brahmin community, that also was given to the Christian community. So the social status of Christians was highly brought up as a result of the arrival of these Christians with the support of the local rulers. Then several migrations took place. In 1825, another major migration took place from Persia to Kerala. This time that was to Kollam. One merchant by name Marwan Sabrishu with two bishops, they came to Kollam with a large number of Christians, and the king of Kollam, Sthanu Ravi Varma, he also accepted them and gave all privileges to them. To mark that occasion, in the Malayalam calendar, Malayalam era, Chingam Kanni Tulam, that was started in 1825. That's the reason why that is known as Kolla Varsham. Started in Kollam to mark the occasion of this major event. A group of Christians from Persia migrated to Kollam, and the king was very happy. Thus came the new calendar for the Malayali Kerala, the Kollam era, Kolla Varsham. So these migrations became very important. The numerical growth for the Christians in Malabar, social privileges they began to enjoy, but spiritually they were totally dead, lethargic. Once in a while, some bishops or priests come from Persia, they recite some liturgy, but Christians in Malabar, they do not understand anything. Bible was not available to them. So this was the situation of the Christians in Malabar right from 1st century, right from the beginning in AD 52 till the beginning of the 16th century. But today, no Christians will accept it. There are several numerous families with family histories. അവർ പറയുന്നു ഞങ്ങളൊക്കെ മതിലേൽ കിളിച്ച പാരമ്പര്യമുള്ളവരാ, വലിയ കുടുംബയോഗങ്ങളൊക്കെ നടത്തുന്നു, but there is no meaning behind it. This was exactly the picture of the Christians right from 1st century till the 16th century. And meantime, the Brahmins, they began to dominate. Brahmanization, Sanskritization became very common in Kerala. More Brahmins began to come from the north to Kerala, and they began to take control of the whole situation. There was no one to question them. They began to travel far and wide. So, Brahmins, under their shadow, the Nair community, they began to take much advantage. They began to claim all the privileges and social status, and thereby eventually they began to pull down the Christians. All the jobs, all the privileges, everything was enjoyed by the Brahmins and the Nair community. Christians were totally brought under their control. Christians were just manual laborers for them. All the land belonged to the Nairs and Brahmins. The Christians were plowing their land, doing their agricultural work, and giving everything crops to the Brahmins and the Hindus. If they give something, the Christians used to eat. Poll taxes were imposed on them. The duties to the temple, that is supply of oil, supply of rice to the temples for prasadams, that was the duty of the Christians. If they do not do that, severe punishment was inflicted on them. So Christians began to cry, exactly as the people of Israelites were in Egypt. the Christians in Malabar during the medieval period, they were completely crying under the oppression of the Brahmin Nair domination. I just want to add one more thing. So there was a time the Christians were struggling for their living, survival. No freedom, no food to eat. They are no free to build a house, build a house or stay there. God began to meet the justice. God began to raise the Christians. Now the land where they plowed and they did the agricultural work, during the last 100 years, they began to buy it. They began to build multi-storied buildings. People who were not able to buy a bullock cart in those days, now having 4 or 5 very costly cars in front of their house. That means our stability stage began to change. Social status began to change. Economic stability became very common. But this is a warning to us. This is not because of our spiritual vibrancy, but God is a righteous God and He meted out justice to the Christians in Malabar. That's why we, our community, our parents, our children enjoy all these privileges and financial stability. If you do not accept it in that way, the same fate that happened on the Nairs now can happen to the Christians maybe during the time of our next generation children. We have to be thankful to God for doing justice to our forefathers and blessing us. But at the same time, we do not think that it is because of our might and ability. It's only because of God's grace. It's a divine justice meted to the Christian community. Okay, so Middle Ages, they had no privileges. They were struggling for their survival. So this became the situation during the first 1500 years for the church in Malabar. Now, from the beginning of the 16th century, the whole situation slowly began to change. Colonialism. Earlier I said about Renaissance and changes in England and Europe. The after effect. Bible was translated in Western countries. So the after effect of the whole process, Renaissance and Reformation. Colonialism became a common phenomenon and several European countries began to come to India. India was a place of their attraction because of the spices available here. So many nations began to come. Portuguese, Denmark, England, France. So almost all the European countries, they slowly began to come to India to establish their colonies. And the first colonial power was Portugal. So Portugal, a Catholic country under the Pope. But they wanted to explore the world and they were much concerned about propagating their Catholic faith all over the world. So they decided to come to India, to find an easy route to India, to establish their colony and also to involve in trade and also to propagate Roman Catholic faith. So multi-purpose, 3 purposes: colonization, then trade, and also propagate Catholicism. Vasco da Gama and a group of people started from Lisbon, the capital of Portugal, rounding the Cape of Good Hope, southern tip of Africa. In 1498, they landed in Calicut. Samutris were the rulers. Treaties were accorded between them, and Kerala was opened before the Portuguese to open up their colonies, to establish their trade, and also to propagate their faith. Then he was followed by Cabral, and large number of people from Portugal began to come. One contemporary writing during the time of the arrival of Vasco da Gama says, the Portuguese do not travel anywhere without priests, monks, or bishops. That means even they go for colonialism or trade, they take priests along with them, monks along with them, mainly for if there is an opportunity to preach the gospel and propagate Roman Catholic faith. So there was a strong bond between Portugal and Malabar started. Then by 1510, Goa was captured by the Portuguese governor by name Albuquerque from the Sultan of Bijapur, and Goa was brought completely under the Portuguese, and Goa became the headquarters of Portuguese colonialism in India. So from Goa, they began to control all their colonial activities, trade, and propagation of Catholic faith. They began to adopt several measures for propagating the faith. Compulsory conversion. In Goa, they demolished all the Hindu places of worship. They permitted only the Christian worship. Forcible conversion. During that battle, many soldiers from India, they died, leaving their wives as widows. The Portuguese soldiers were encouraged to marry these widows of the Indian soldiers. There came a mixed group, usually known as the Eurasians or Anglo-Indians, what we call. So a mixed population, they were strongly brought up as Roman Catholics. All the privileges and offices, jobs were given to the Christians. So in Goa, the Catholics employed a machinery to attract everyone by any means, by hook or crook. Thereby, Goa was completely became a Christian dominant area during the time. Then from Goa, they began to bring their missionaries, their monks, and they began to send them to different parts of India, to Kerala. That was the time, during the time, the fishermen community in Kerala, they were converted to Christianity, Roman Catholicism. Then in Tamil Nadu, then from India to the eastern countries, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, Malaya, Sri Lanka, to China, to all these areas, they began to send missionaries and propagate Catholic faith. Catholicism became a major development during that particular time. Now when they came to Malabar, I'll stop within 2 minutes. Major development, when they came to Malabar, they saw a Christian community in Malabar. But they realized that their faith is entirely different from the Roman Catholic faith. Portuguese were Western Christians and Christians in Malabar were Eastern Christians. There were several differences in their practice, faith, liturgy, traditions. So Catholics started a strategy to bring the St. Thomas Christians, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ Christians who were living in Malabar, to bring them under the Roman Catholic faith. Converting the Christians in Malabar to Roman Catholic faith. That process is known as Romanization or Latinization. Here the language was Syriac, but Roman Catholics Latin. So the St. Thomas Christians, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ Christians in Malabar, they wanted to convert them entirely to Roman Catholic faith. So for 100 years, the Roman Catholic Church adopted several measures to convert St. Thomas Christians to Roman Catholic faith. The details I'll explain in the next class, where we have the famous Synod of Diamber, Udayam Peru Sunahados. The after effect of that synod is the famous Kun and Cross Oath, Kun and Kurish Satyam. These two things I'll explain probably in the next class.